The World Chess Championship match 2024 is heating up. 4 games have been played and the score is 2-2. Both players managed to win one game, and it was in the games where Gukesh was playing with the white pieces. Now it's game 5. Gukesh is playing again with the white pieces. Ding Liren is playing with black. And are we going to see another decisive game? Well, very interesting. Let's dive straight into the action. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure to do that because I will cover all the highlights of this fascinating World Chess Championship match. Gukesh, when he was successful in game 3 with a fantastic victory, he opened the game with 1d4, but for some reason he decided to go back to 1e4, which he tried in game 1, the game he lost. So it's very interesting what he had prepared. And of course, what is Ding going to play? Is he going to play solid with his very common response 1e5, or is he going to play again the French defense? Well, I'm not going to leave you in doubt any longer. Here the move e6 is played indeed again. So Ding is returning back to his beloved French defense. d4, d5. And here Gukesh is the one to surprise his opponent. As in game 1, he played here the move knight c3, but well, the game was super complicated, but he now decides to play in a more simple way, as he goes for the move pawn takes d5, the exchange variation of the French. And well, a lot of people think this is a very boring line. Well, watch this game, guys. It can get really interesting. And well, nowadays, these symmetrical positions, as black recaptures with the pawn on d5, you can get them from the Petrov defense, from the Berlin defense, also from the French. And usually white is just always a little bit better because that little tempo that can be quite useful. Let's see how it works out in this game. Knight f3, knight f6, bishop d3, and now black tries to break the symmetry with the move c5. Very active play, hoping that white is going to take so you can recapture with the bishop in one go. You don't want to move the bishop first and then be forced to recapture with that piece. In these structures, playing with an isolated pawn, of course, you do have a structural weakness, but black's piece activity should compensate for that. Well, Gukesh played here the main move, c3, overprotecting the pawn on d4. Probably if black is going to take, you're going to recapture with the knight, maintaining a nice blockade on the d4 square. But Ding advances the pawn to c4, hitting the bishop. And now the bishop can drop back to c2. The bishop is nicely placed on this diagonal, and it's looking for tactical opportunities later on there, but let's see if white does get a chance to do so. Bishop d6, and here another interesting move is to castle kingside, trying to follow up with rook e1. There's a lot of theory there as well, but queen e2 is played in the game, giving a check and checking out what black is going to do. Well, Ding plays it solid with the move queen e7. Queens are coming off the board and black is recapturing with the king. The king stays in the center, white castles. And black is going to castle in an artificial way with the move rook e8, so that after rook e1 check, the king can drop back to f8. Now the rooks are coming off the board as well. Rook takes e8, king takes e8, and here it is bishop to g5. Active development, threatening to take the knight on f6, after which not only the pawn structure gets ruined, you don't want to get these double pawns, but also the pawn on h7 will be unprotected. And therefore, the move knight bd7 does make a lot of sense. The knight is protecting its colleague on f6. Well, interesting moment. What should white try to do in these sort of positions? Well, there are a number of plans. First of all, I would say a move like knight bd2, which was indeed played in the game, does make a lot of sense. So this knight is on its way probably to f1, maybe to e3. You can attack the pawn on d5 one more time. Maybe you can use the f5 square for one of your knights, so that you hit the bishop, you hit the pawn on g7. Also, knight h4 is a very interesting idea. But you can play only one move. Knight bd2 was played, h6, attacking the bishop. And the bishop goes back to h4. Now, you do maintain the pressure there, but there is some sort of positional threat. If white does get a chance here to play bishop g3, swap the dark squared bishops, then white's minor pieces are just a little bit better than black's, because the pawns in the center are fixed on the light squares. And that means that the bishop on c8 is not really enjoying himself there. So bishop g3, I think, is a nice idea. If you can swap bishops, you should try to do that. But knight h5 is a very nice response, so that this bishop does stay on the board. Now in case of bishop g3, the knight is going to take that bishop. Rook e1, check. The king cannot go to d8, has to go to f8, but that's fine. And how should white continue? Well, there are a number of options, but I would say something like knight f1, knight e3 is quite logical. Attacking the pawn on d5, probably black can defend it, and position should be very equal. But Gukesh is not going to play this exchange variation of the French with the aim of making a solid draw. He really is trying to create something. He played here the move g4. So whenever he does get a chance, in game 1, he had this very sharp French position. On move 10, he played the move g4. Then there was also this very interesting Queen's Gambit decline game, which he managed to win. There was also very sharp play with g4. He likes this very sharp move. But here, it really does weaken the king side. The knight comes in to f4. It's a beautiful square. It cannot be chased away by the g-pawn any longer. Bishop goes back to g3. That's the point. So that you do pin the knight. If the knight moves somewhere, the bishop on d6 will be hanging. So that's not good. Black has to act here. Knight b6. Very interesting move. Protecting the pawn. Not that it's under an attack. But the knight is making room for this bishop. So the bishop can be developed. And most importantly, it does hit that pawn on g4. And how is white going to defend it? Well, not too many options. Here, Gukesh played the move g5. He's playing super actively, trying to create something on that side of the board. Pawn takes g5, knight takes g5. And you have to be careful. If white were here to play, it's knight h7 check. King has to go to g8. And then it will be rook e8 with mate to follow. Of course, that's not going to happen in a World Chess Championship match. Bishop d7 is a good move so that you cover the square and the rook is ready to join play. But what is white exactly doing here? I'm not sure, because I understand that white is active with the knight, but it has really weakened its own position by splitting these pawns on the king side. Knight gf3 was played in the game. Knight is coming back. And after rook e8, black is offering the exchange of rooks and aim for more simplifications. That does look like a very sensible plan. Now, rather than exchanging rooks, white played here this move, knight e5. So, disconnecting the bishop from defending the knight. White's threatening to take the knight on f4. But there is bishop takes e5. You may just take back with the rook and aim for these simplifications. And probably this endgame should still be very equal. But instead, Gukesh played pawn takes e5. What is he doing here? He wants to force the knight to go away. Let's say if the knight goes back, then maybe f4 and f5. That's all of a sudden these pawns, they can become really strong. And maybe a knight from d2 lands on d4 with fantastic attacking prospects. Well, that didn't happen. Black didn't cooperate. Black went with his knight to d3, which is a much more active move. And it could very well be that Gukesh underestimated the strength of it, because the rook is under an attack. Also, the pawn on b2 is hanging. If you do protect it with something like rook b1, then the pawn on e5 will be taken. So, bishop takes d3 is like only move. And now it's pawn takes d3. And of course, this is something Gukesh had seen. But probably he thought that that pawn is going to be very weak. Maybe there's something like rook e3, rook takes d3. Well, if you do play rook e3, there's bishop f5. And I don't see how you are going to exchange, get rid of that pawn on d3. It's a very annoying pawn. In the game, something else happened. There followed the move f3. So that very soon the king is able to come over to e3 to try to wrap up that pawn. But now there is knight c4, which is an excellent move. As black, you do try now to get rid of that annoying defender on d2. That's very important, blockading piece. Knight takes c4, d takes c4, and all of a sudden it's black who does have a protected passed pawn. Still, it's a rook endgame with opposite colored bishops. Now, if the rooks are coming off the board, well, probably it should be quite an easy draw. You can just block on the dark squares, bring over your king. But with rooks on the board, looks like very tricky position. Well, Gukesh played here rook e4, so that he is attacking the pawn on c4. And I think this is a very important moment in the match, as here Ding understands he is doing okay, he's doing fine, he's never ever gonna lose this position. But he didn't realize that his position is actually still really worth trying here. he played the move bishop c6. But if you do put the bishop on e6 instead, the pawn on c4 is well protected. And it's not going to be easy to get rid of that pawn on d3 very, very soon. You can go b5. Of course, I'm not guaranteeing here any sort of win, but you do have chances to play on and create something. You can try to activate a rook. Maybe you can attack the weaknesses on the queen side. I mean, white cannot really do something on the king side himself. You can always go g6 and keep everything blockaded on the light squares. Well, anyway, bishop c6. Why did Ding play this move? He hits the rook. He's hoping that white is going to take on c4. But this didn't happen. There is rook d8 in that case, and this d-pawn cannot be stopped. It's supported from the rook from behind, and it's d2, d1 queen, and white will be forced to give up material. So instead, rather than taking the pawn, white played the move rook d4. Rook is well placed behind that pawn. I think it's very, very instructive. And maybe at some point the pawn on c4 can be taken still anyway. But first, there is bishop takes f3. Black is taking that pawn. He is a pawn up now. But there's king f2. The king comes with tempo, hits the bishop. It's closer to stop the passed pawn. But also now after bishop to c6, it is rook takes c4. And now the pawn on d3 is not as strong as it could have been. It no longer can count on the support of that pawn. So therefore black played here rook d8. Again, threatening to push the pawn. And you cannot really block with your king because there's always bishop f3 with check. And the promotion square will be covered. White played rook d4. And now it's clear that the rook is under attack. And the rook is also hitting the pawn on d3. So now rooks are indeed coming off the board. Black puts the bishop on d5, hits the pawn on a2. Pawns in the center are blockaded on light squares. b3, king e7, king e3. Attacking the pawn. I mean, you probably cannot really stop. You cannot really prevent white from capturing the pawn anytime soon. Maybe you can go for tricky ideas with bishop e4, because if you take the bishop, there's d2. But why would you try that? King e6 is okay. White takes on d3. Black is now all of a sudden a pawn down. That's quite remarkable. You were a pawn up a few moves ago. But it also really shows how happy Ding is to escape again with a black game. Well, I mean, g6 played, king c3, a6, king d3, king f5, king e3, king e6. There's nothing either side can do. So on move 40, the players agreed to a draw. Absolutely amazing. I mean, I'm not sure how big this chance was. I mean, definitely black is better. And then Ding, in super form, in great shape, he would have gone here for bishop e6 with chances to try for something, to put some long-term pressure on white. But he wanted to make a draw. So the game is a draw, and the match is still tied. It's 2.5, 2.5. And Ding, as I said again multiple times, he's happy to make a draw. I think in general he wants to get away from this match. And if it will be a tie at the end, and well, if it would be a tie break, I think he would be relieved for sure. But it's still a long way to go, and there are still 7 more games to be played. So it's not the right strategy, in my opinion, to try to make draws whenever you can. But it's Ding. It's his approach. It's his match, and also it's Gukesh's match. Let's see what's going to happen in the coming rounds. I'm very excited. Even though this was an exchange French, I still think there were quite a number of interesting moments. And you can see that players are trying. They try to do something, not always the highest quality we would hope to see in such a match. But tension is high, stakes are high. Let's see what's going to happen, guys. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done yet. And then see you soon again for Game 6.